Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. Donald Gill's truck rumbled to a stop in the driveway of a suburban home. The 45-year-old civil engineer sat for a moment, his callous hand still gripping the steering wheel. The unexpected equipment malfunction at the project site had thrown his week into disarray, but it was a gnawing feeling in his gut that truly unsettled him. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. Then he heard it, a muffled giggle from an open upstairs window. The sound hit him like a punch to the solar plexus. He knew that laugh. It was Lucille's, his wife of 20 years, but it held a carefree quality he hadn't heard directed at him in ages. Donald moved with the quiet precision of a man who'd spent decades on construction sites. He eased the front door open, thankful for the recent WD-40 application that silenced its usual creak. The giggle came again, louder now, emanating from their bedroom upstairs. "Oh, Jason, you're terrible." Lucille's voice floated down, a mixture of mock outrage and barely contained mirth. Jason, the name lodged in Donald's brain like a splinter. He knew a Jason, Lucille's yoga instructor, young and fit. With an easy smile that Donald had always found a touch too ingratiating, his eyes fell on Lucille's phone, carelessly left on the kitchen counter. The little voice of morality that had guided him since his Boy Scout days put up a token resistance, but it was quickly silenced. Donald picked up the device, relieved to find it unlocked. What he saw made his vision blur. Months of flirtatious text messages, each more intimate than the last. Photos that seared themselves into his memory, compromising images of his wife that she had never shared with him. Credit card statements showing expenses at high-end restaurants and hotel bookings on days Lucille had claimed to be working late. Donald's legal training kicked in, overriding the urge to storm upstairs and confront them. Evidence. He needed evidence. With practiced efficiency, he connected the phone to his laptop and began copying everything to a secure cloud drive. As he worked, Donald's mind raced through the past few months. The late nights at the gallery, the sudden interest in yoga, the way Lucille's eyes would dart away when he asked about her day. It all fit together now. A jigsaw puzzle of betrayal. He finished the data transfer just as he heard footsteps on the stairs. Donald quickly replaced the phone and moved to the living room, feigning nonchalance as he pretended to rifle through his work bag. Lucille breezed in, her cheeks flushed and hair slightly mussed. "Donald, you're home early. Is everything okay at the site?" He looked at her, this woman he'd shared his life with for over 2 decades, and felt a chill settle in his chest. "Equipment malfunction," he said, his voice steady. "Nothing we can't handle." Lucille nodded, a flicker of relief passing over her features. "Well, I'm glad you're home. I was just about to start dinner. Any requests?" Donald shook his head, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack his face. "Whatever you want is fine. I've got some work to catch up on." As Lucille turned towards the kitchen, Donald retreated to his home office. He sat heavily in his chair, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him. He knew what he had to do next, but the thought filled him with a cold, hard anger he'd never experienced before. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur for Donald. On the surface, life continued as normal. He went to work, came home, shared meals with Lucille. But beneath a veneer of normalcy, a storm was brewing. Donald sat in a nondescript cafe, his fingers drumming nervously on the tabletop. Across from him sat Orlando Campbell, a man whose profession thrived on discretion. "Mr. Gill," Orlando began, his voice low and measured, "I've compiled the information you requested." He slid a manila envelope across the table. Donald's hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. "And you're certain about all of this?" Donald asked. Orlando nodded gravely. "Every bit of it is documented and verified. Photos, times, locations. It's all there." With a deep breath, Donald opened the envelope. The contents confirmed his worst fears. Photographic evidence of Lucille and Jason's rendezvous at various locations, hotels, restaurants, even a secluded park bench. Each image was like a dagger to his heart. "There's more," Orlando continued. "I did some digging on this Jason character. Turns out he has a history of affairs with married women from his yoga classes. At least 3 confirmed in the past 2 years." Donald's jaw clenched. "And Lucille," Orlando's expression turned grim. "She's been skipping work to meet him, Mr. Gill. It's jeopardizing her position at the art gallery." Donald nodded, a cold determination settling over him. "Thank you, Orlando. You've been thorough." As he left the cafe, Donald's mind was already racing ahead. He needed legal advice, and he knew just who to call. Kenneth Noble's office was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, a stark contrast to the chaos Donald felt inside. His longtime friend and attorney listened intently as Donald laid out the situation, spreading Orlando's evidence across the polished desk. "Jesus, Donald," Kenneth said, leaning back in his chair. "I'm so sorry. Are you sure about this? No chance of reconciliation?" Donald's laugh was hollow. "Ken, you've seen the evidence. This isn't a one-time thing. It's been going on for months. And it's not just the affair. She's been lying about work, risking her job. I need to know my options." Kenneth nodded, his expression grave. "All right. Then let's talk strategy. First things first. We need to protect your assets. Have you separated your finances yet?" "Started to. I've been moving funds to secure accounts. But I do want to avoid raising suspicion by doing too much at once." "Good thinking," Kenneth approved. "We'll need to document everything. Lucille's spending, her absences from work, any neglect of household responsibilities. What about your daughter, Amber? How's she factoring into all this?" Donald's face darkened. "Lucille's been skipping Amber's parent-teacher conferences, claiming work commitments. I've been picking up the slack, but I'm worried about how this will affect her." Kenneth made a note. "That's good. It shows Lucille's priorities aren't with the family. Now let's talk about gathering admissible evidence." As they delved into the legal intricacies, Donald felt a grim sense of purpose settling over him. He'd been betrayed, yes, but he'd be damned if he'd let Lucille walk away. The next few days passed in a haze of covert financial maneuvering and evidence gathering. Donald felt like he was living a double life. Dutiful husband by night, wronged man plotting his next move by day. Friday evening arrived, heavy with anticipation. Donald had prepared a dossier of evidence, photos, text messages, financial records, all neatly organized and devastatingly thorough. As he heard Lucille's key in the lock, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Lucille bustled in, arms full of groceries. "Hey, honey, I thought we could have a nice dinner tonight. I picked up some of that wine you like." Donald watched her move around the kitchen. Her domesticity, a stark contrast to the evidence of her deceit, sitting in a folder on his lap. "Sounds great," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Why do we sit down and talk while it's cooking?" Lucille glanced at him, a flicker of worry and guilt crossing her face before she smiled. "Of course, everything okay?" They settled at the dining room table, the folder between them like a ticking time bomb. Donald looked at his wife, really looked at her. For a moment, he saw the young woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Then the image of her with Jason flashed in his mind, and his resolve hardened. "Lucille," he began, his voice steady, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. What's your relationship with Jason?" The color drained from Lucille's face, but she quickly composed herself. "Jason, my yoga instructor. He's just a friend, Donald." "Why do you ask?" Donald nodded slowly, as if considering her words. Then, with deliberate movements, he opened the folder and began laying out the evidence, piece by piece. "Just a friend," he repeated, his voice flat as he placed a photo of Lucille and Jason together on the table. "Is this how you greet all your friends?" Lucille's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Donald continued, relentless. "Or maybe this is normal friendly behavior." He slid over a printout of their text messages, intimate details that made him sick to read. "Tell me, Lucille, do all your friends know what you prefer?" "Donald, I can explain," Lucille stammered, her composure crumbling. "Can you?" Donald's voice was ice. "Can you explain the hotel charges on our credit card? The days you called in sick to work but were actually with him? The money you've been funneling to him?" Tears streamed down Lucille's face now. It was a mistake. A momentary lapse in judgment. It didn't mean anything. Donald laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. "A momentary lapse. Lucille, this has been going on for months. You've lied to me, to our daughter, to your colleagues. You've spent our money, neglected your responsibilities. Tell me, what part of that is momentary?" Before Lucille could respond, they heard a gasp from the doorway. Both turned to see their daughter, Amber, standing there, her face a mask of shock and confusion. "Mom, Dad, what's going on?" Amber's voice quavered. Donald took a deep breath. "Amber, I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but your mother—" "Don't you dare," Amber interrupted, her shock morphing into anger. "I already know about Mom's affair, and I can't believe you're being so cold about it." Donald felt like he'd been slapped. "You knew?" Amber's eyes flashed. "Of course I knew. Mom's been happier these past few months than I've seen her in years. And now you're going to throw it all away over something as stupid as an affair." "Amber, you don't understand," Donald began, but his daughter cut him off again. "No, you don't understand. People make mistakes, Dad. But if you leave us over this, if you can't forgive Mom, then you're dead to me." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Donald looked from his furious daughter to his sobbing wife, feeling a chasm opening up beneath him. Without a word, he stood and walked out of the room as he packed a bag in their bedroom, where Lucille had betrayed him countless times. He could hear Amber's voice drifting up from downstairs. "Don't worry, Mom. He'll get over it. Your happiness matters too." Donald zipped up his bag, a cold, hard knot forming in his chest. As he walked out of the house, leaving behind the wreckage of his family, one thought crystallized in his mind. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The hotel room felt sterile and impersonal, a fitting backdrop for the coldness that had settled in Donald Gill's chest. He sat on the edge of the bed, his laptop open before him, the events of the past 48 hours playing on a loop in his mind. The betrayal, the confrontation, Amber's words, "You're dead to me," echoing like a cruel mantra. Donald rubbed his eyes, fatigue and emotional exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. But he couldn't afford a breakdown. Not now. Not when there was so much to be done. His phone buzzed, startling him out of his dark reverie. An unknown number. Donald hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mr. Gill," a crisp, professional voice came through. "This is Margaret Chun from Global Infrastructure Solutions. I hope I'm not disturbing you on a weekend." Donald straightened, his mind shifting gears. "Not at all, Ms. Chun. What can I do for you?" "We've been following your work on the Richardson project, Mr. Gill. Impressive stuff. We have a major international infrastructure project coming up in Singapore, and we'd like to discuss your potential involvement." Donald's pulse quickened. Singapore, halfway around the world. A chance to put some distance between himself and the wreckage of his personal life. "I'm very interested, Ms. Chun. What would you like to meet?" As he jotted down the details for a Monday morning video call, a plan began to form in Donald's mind. This wasn't just an escape. It was an opportunity. An opportunity for— the word came to him, unbidden— revenge. The thought should have shocked him. Donald Gill, Boy Scout, upstanding citizen, contemplating revenge, but it didn't shock him. Instead, it sent a thrill of dark anticipation through his body. He opened a new browser tab and began researching. If he was going to do this, he needed information about Jason, about Lucille's finances, about divorce laws in their state. Hours passed. The room grew darker as the sun set outside his window. Donald barely noticed, his eyes fixed on the screen, absorbing every detail. It was well past midnight when he stumbled upon a forum post that made him sit up straight. A yoga student complaining about an instructor named Jason who had taken advantage of her, mentioning his gambling debts and connections to local loan sharks. Donald's lips curved into a mirthless smile. This was it, the leverage he needed. Jason's Achilles heel. He leaned back, his mind racing with possibilities. The Singapore project, Jason's gambling problem, Lucille's financial indiscretions, all the pieces were there, waiting to be arranged. Donald reached for his phone again, this time dialing a familiar number. "Kenneth, it's Donald. I know it's late, but I need your advice on something. How familiar are you with international contract law?" As he outlined his thoughts to his attorney friend, Donald felt a sense of purpose settling over him. This wasn't just about hurting Lucille and Jason. It was about reclaiming control, about ensuring that they felt every ounce of pain they had inflicted on him. By the time the sun rose, bathing the hotel room in a pale, watery light, Donald had the skeleton of a plan. He would accept the Singapore project. He would use the distance and the international complications to his advantage. And he would make sure that both Lucille and Jason learned the true meaning of consequences. Donald stood, stretching his stiff muscles, and walked to the window. The city was coming to life below. People starting their Sunday routines, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in room 412. He placed his palm against the cool glass, his reflection staring back at him with hard, determined eyes. "Be prepared," he muttered to himself, a twisted echo of his Boy Scout days. He'd be prepared all right, and they wouldn't know what hit them. The Singapore skyline glittered in the distance, a testament to human ambition and engineering prowess. Donald Gill stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his temporary office, but his mind was far from the architectural marvels before him. A month had passed since he'd left the wreckage of his personal life behind. A month of careful planning, of setting pieces into motion. Now, it was time for the next phase. Donald turned back to his desk, where his laptop displayed a series of complex financial reports. He'd hired a team of forensic accountants, ostensibly to review the project finances. In reality, they were tracing every penny of his and Lucille's assets. His phone buzzed, a text from the lead accountant. "You need to see this." Donald's heart rate picked up as he opened the attached file. There it was, in black and white. Lucille had been siphoning money from their joint account. Small amounts at first, then larger sums, all transferred to an account under Jason McKinney's name. A cruel smile played at the corners of Donald's mouth. This wasn't just infidelity anymore. This was financial misconduct. In the eyes of the law, it could be seen as dissipation of marital assets. He carefully saved the evidence, adding it to his growing dossier. Next, he opened his email. From an anonymous account he'd set up weeks ago, with methodical precision, he began composing messages to Jason's yoga clients. Not all of them, of course, just the married women. Just enough to start the whispers, the rumors. "Did you know your instructor has a history of pursuing married students? Are you aware of Jason McKinney's gambling debts? Send, send, send." Donald leaned back in his chair, imagining the chaos these little digital bombs would create. Jason's reputation would take a hit. His client base would dwindle. The financial pressure would mount. But he wasn't done yet. Donald picked up his burner phone, purchased with cash untraceable, and dialed a number he procured through less than legal means. "Yeah," a gruff voice answered. "Is this Big Mike?" Donald asked, his voice steady. "Who's asking?" "Someone who thinks you might be interested in knowing about a new source of income for Jason McKinney. I hear he owes you quite a bit." There was a pause on the other end. "I'm listening," Donald smiled. The loan sharks would add another layer of pressure. Jason would find himself squeezed from all sides. With that task complete, Donald turned his attention to the shared investment portfolio he managed with Lucille, making a few careful trades. He could make it appear as though her decisions had led to significant losses. It wouldn't be enough to bankrupt them. He wasn't about to jeopardize his own financial future, but it would add to the mounting stress. As he executed the trades, Donald's mind wandered to Amber, his daughter. The betrayal still stung, her words echoing in his mind. But he couldn't bring himself to target her directly. Instead, he'd secured her college fund in a separate account. Let Lucille and Jason's actions jeopardize their own futures, not Amber's. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and conference calls. Donald played his role perfectly. The dedicated engineer focused on the massive infrastructure project. But beneath the surface, his mind was constantly working, planning, refining his strategy. As night fell, Donald made one final move. He reached out to contacts in the art world. People he'd met through Lucille over the years. A casual comment here, a subtle insinuation there. Just enough to plant seeds of doubt about Lucille's professional integrity. Exhausted but satisfied, Donald finally allowed himself to relax. He poured a glass of whiskey and returned to the window, gazing out at the glittering city. In the reflection, he barely recognized himself. The man staring back at him was harder, colder. A man capable of calculated revenge. Donald raised his glass in a mock toast to his reflection. To the unforgiving path, he murmured and drank deeply. 2 months into his plan, Donald found himself standing once again on the familiar doorstep of the house he once called home. The Singaporean sun had darkened his skin, and the weeks of calculated revenge had hardened his resolve. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come, and rang the doorbell. Lucille opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "Donald, I didn't know you were back in town." Donald forced a smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Surprise," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Can I come in? I thought we could talk." Lucille hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. As Donald entered, he took in the few changes in the house. A new throw pillow on the couch. A different scent in the air. Small things that spoke volumes about how life had continued in his absence. But it was Lucille herself that caught his attention. The confident, carefree woman he'd left behind 2 months ago was gone. In her place stood someone stressed and distracted, dark circles under her eyes and a constant furrow in her brow. They settled in the living room, an awkward silence stretching between them. "How's the project in Singapore?" Lucille finally asked, her voice strained with forced politeness. Donald launched into a detailed explanation of the infrastructure work, watching Lucille's eyes glaze over. He was mid-sentence when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face paling slightly before she hurriedly silenced it. "Everything okay?" Donald asked, feigning concern. Lucille nodded too quickly. "Yes, just work stuff. You know how it is." But Donald did know. He knew that Jason's yoga studio was hemorrhaging clients, that rumors were swirling about his inappropriate relationships with married students. He knew that loan sharks were circling, demanding repayment of gambling debts with escalating threats. "Speaking of work," Donald said carefully, "how are things at the gallery?" Lucille's facade cracked slightly. It's been challenging lately. Some issues with a few exhibitions. Nothing major." Donald nodded sympathetically, even as he inwardly smiled. His so-called campaign to damage Lucille's professional reputation was bearing fruit. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "You know, if you're having any financial troubles, I'd be happy to help. We could go over the accounts together, see where we stand." Lucille's eyes darted nervously around the room. That's very kind of you, Donald. But I'm sure it's just a temporary setback." Donald pressed on, relentless in his fox helpfulness. "Still, it might be good to meet with a financial advisor, just to be safe. I know a great one." Lucille could only nod in agreement. As if on cue, the front door opened, and Amber walked in. She stopped short at the sight of her father. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Donald stood, opening his arms. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm back in town for a bit. Thought I'd stop by." Amber hesitated for a moment before allowing a brief, stiff hug. "How long are you staying?" "Not sure yet," Donald replied. Depends on how things go here. He turned back to Lucille. I'll set up that meeting with the financial advisor. Maybe Amber should join us too. Always good to start learning about these things early. Amber's brow furrowed. Financial advisor, what's going on? Lucille jumped in quickly. It's nothing, honey. Just some routine financial planning. But Donald could see the seed of doubt planted in Amber's mind. Good. Let her start to question, to worry. As he left the house that evening, Donald felt satisfaction. The pressure was mounting, cracks appearing in the facade Lucille had built, and he was just getting started. Over the next few weeks, Donald's plan continued to unfold. The meeting with the financial advisor, secretly arranged by Kenneth, painted a picture of their financial future. Donald watched as both Lucille and Amber grew increasingly anxious, the weight of potential financial ruin settling on their shoulders. During his visits, ostensibly attempts at reconciliation, Donald gathered more evidence, a carelessly discarded receipt here, an overheard phone conversation there, each piece carefully documented, building an ironclad case for the divorce proceedings to come. One evening, as Donald was preparing to leave after another tense family dinner, he overheard Amber confronting Lucille in the kitchen. Mom, what's really going on? Are we in trouble? Is this because of Jason? Donald paused by the door, listening intently. It's complicated, sweetie. Lucille's voice was strained. But I promise, I'm handling it. Are you? Amber's voice cracked slightly. Because it doesn't seem like you're handling anything. Dad's back. We're meeting with financial advisors. And you look like you haven't slept in weeks. What aren't you telling me? Donald slipped out before he could hear Lucille's response, a cold smile playing on his lips. The doubts were growing, the pressure increasing. Soon, very soon, it would all come crashing down. As he drove back to his hotel, Donald reflected on the past 2 months. The careful manipulation, the strategic moves, the slow but steady erosion of Lucille and Jason's lives. It should have made him feel guilty, this calculated destruction. But all he felt was satisfaction. They had destroyed his life, shattered his trust, broken his family. Now they would reap what they had sown. The unforgiving path of revenge stretched out before him, and Donald Gill was committed to seeing it through to the bitter end. Donald Gill stood in the kitchen of what was once his family home, a manila envelope clutched in his hand. The weight of its contents, divorce papers meticulously prepared by Kenneth, felt heavier than they should. He glanced at his watch. Lucille would be home soon. As if on cue, he heard the jangle of keys in the lock. Donald straightened, his face a mask of calm determination. The time for pretense was over. Lucille bustled in, arms full of groceries. She stopped short at the sight of Donald, her eyes darting nervously to the envelope in his hand. Donald, what's going on? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched as she set down the bags, her movements betraying her unease. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, devoid of emotion. Lucille, we need to talk. She complied, sinking into a kitchen chair, her face pale. Donald remained standing, towering over her. I think you know what this is, he said, placing the envelope on the table between them. Lucille's hand trembled as she reached for it. Divorce papers, she whispered. Not a question, but a defeated statement. Donald nodded, along with a comprehensive record of her affair and financial misdeeds. Every text, every hotel receipt, every penny you've siphoned from our accounts to fund Jason's gambling habit. The color drained from Lucille's face. How did you really think I wouldn't find out? Donald's voice was cold. I'm a civil engineer, Lucille. I build things for a living. Did you think I couldn't deconstruct your web of lies? Tears welled up in Lucille's eyes. Donald, please. I love you. We can fix this. For a moment, Donald felt a flicker of the love he once had for this woman, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her betrayal, of Amber's cruel words. There's nothing to work through, Lucille. Your actions and Amber's response have shown me the truth about our family. This marriage is over. As if summoned by her name, Amber chose that moment to walk into the kitchen. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene before her. Mom. Dad? What's happening? Donald turned to his daughter, his expression hardening. Your mother and I are getting a divorce. I'm sure this comes as no surprise to you. Given her previous insight into the situation, Amber's face flushed with anger. You can't be serious. Mom made a mistake, Dad. People deserve second chances. A mistake. Donald's laugh was harsh. Let me show you what your mother's mistake has cost us. He pulled out a series of financial documents from the envelope, spreading them across the table. Your mother has been funneling money to Jason for months. Money from our joint accounts, money earmarked for your education. Amber's eyes widened as she scanned the documents. Mom, is this true? Lucille's sob was answer enough. Amber stumbled back, her righteous anger deflating as the reality of the situation sank in. Donald watched the doubt creep into his daughter's eyes. Feeling satisfaction, I'll be moving out. My lawyer will be in touch regarding the division of assets and custody arrangements. As he turned to leave, Lucille's voice, small and broken, stopped him. Donald, please. I love you. We can fix this. He paused at the doorway, not turning back. Love, you don't even know the meaning of the word. With that, he walked out, leaving behind the wreckage of his family. As he got into his car, he could hear Amber's raised voice through the open kitchen window. How could you, Mom? How could you do this to us? Donald allowed himself a small, cold smile as he drove away. The unraveling had begun. Donald sat in the austere conference room of Global Infrastructure Solutions, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the polished mahogany table. The Singapore project, once his ticket to freedom and revenge, now threatened to become his downfall. Mr. Gill, the company's internal investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Chun, began. We've received some troubling information regarding the procurement of the Singapore contract. Allegations of bribery have been made. Donald's mind raced. Bribery? I've done nothing of the sort. Every aspect of the deal had been above board, meticulously documented. That's absurd, he replied, keeping his voice level. I can assure you, every step of the negotiation process was in full compliance with both local and international law. Sarah's expression remained impassive. I'm sure you understand that we need to conduct a thorough investigation. In the meantime, you'll be placed on administrative leave. As Donald left the office, his phone buzzed. A text from Kenneth. Lucille's lawyer called. She's using the bribery allegations in the divorce proceedings. Says it proves you're untrustworthy. Call me ASAP. Donald's hand tightened around the phone. Of course, Lucille would use this against me. She was fighting dirty now, desperate to salvage what she could from the wreckage of our marriage. Over the next few weeks, Donald's life became a whirlwind of legal meetings and late-night strategy sessions. With Kenneth's help, he worked tirelessly to clear his name, all while keeping the divorce proceedings on track. We need to find out where these allegations came from, Kenneth said one evening, his tie loosened. Empty coffee cups littered the desk between them. This isn't just about the divorce anymore, Don. Your whole career is at stake. Donald nodded. I've been going over every interaction, every email related to the Singapore project. There's got to be something we're missing. They pored over documents late into the night. A pattern began to emerge. Subtle discrepancies in communication timestamps, inconsistencies in email metadata. Kenneth, Donald said slowly, a spark of realization in his eyes. I think I know what's going on. This isn't just a baseless accusation. Someone's actively trying to frame me. Kenneth leaned forward, intrigued. Go on. Look at these emails. Donald spread out a series of printouts. The headers don't match up. Someone's been intercepting and altering our communications, but who would have the resources and motivation to do something like this? The answer hit them both at the same time. A rival company. With this new lead, Donald and Kenneth redoubled their efforts. They hired cybersecurity experts to trace the altered communications, followed paper trails that led to shell companies and offshore accounts. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings loomed. Lucille, emboldened by the bribery allegations, pushed for a larger settlement. After all, her lawyer argued in one particularly heated meeting, Mrs. Gill needs protection given the likelihood of Mr. Gill's imminent unemployment and potential criminal charges. Donald gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remain calm. He knew the truth would come out. It had to. As the investigation progressed, Donald found himself working around the clock. By day, he gathered evidence to clear his name in the bribery case. By night, he refined his strategy for the divorce proceedings. Sleep became a luxury he could ill afford. It was during one of these late-night sessions, as Donald combed through yet another batch of financial records, that he stumbled upon the crucial piece of evidence, a series of transactions, carefully hidden, that linked a rival construction firm to the shell companies behind the altered communications. "Got you," Donald whispered, a fierce grin spreading across his face. He immediately called Kenneth. "We've got them," he said as soon as his friend picked up. "I can prove the bribery allegations were a setup, but we need to move fast." Kenneth's voice was alert despite the late hour. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything until I get there." As they prepared to present their findings to Global Infrastructure Solutions and the authorities, Donald allowed himself a moment of reflection. The past few months had been crucible, testing him in ways he never imagined, but he'd emerged stronger, more determined than ever. Lucille, Jason, the rivals who tried to frame him, they had all underestimated Donald Gill. They were about to learn the cost of that mistake. The boardroom of Global Infrastructure Solutions was silent as Donald finished presenting his evidence. The faces around the table ranged from shocked to impressed, with more than a few guilty looks from those who had been quick to believe the bribery allegations. Sarah Chun, the internal investigator who had initially confronted Donald, was the first to speak. "Mr. Gill, we owe you an apology. The thoroughness of your investigation is remarkable." Donald nodded, accepting the apology with grace. "I understand you were doing your job, Miss Chun. I'm just glad we were able to uncover the truth." The CEO, a gruff man named Harrison Wells, cleared his throat. "Donald, I won't mince words. You've not only cleared your name but uncovered a plot that could have cost the company millions. Your integrity and dedication are exactly what we need in a leader." Donald's eyebrows rose. "Sir, we'll be announcing a restructuring next week. I'd like you to consider taking on a more senior role. VP of International Projects, perhaps." As the meeting adjourned, Donald felt a weight lift from his shoulders. His professional reputation wasn't just intact, it had been enhanced. The future, which had seemed so uncertain just days ago, now held new promise. But there was still one more battle to fight. The divorce proceedings, which had dragged on for months, came to a swift conclusion in light of the new developments. Lucille, her leverage evaporated with the dismissal of the bribery allegations, was left with little to negotiate. In the end, she received minimal alimony, her infidelity and financial misconduct working against her. The judge was particularly unimpressed by her attempts to use the false bribery accusations to gain an advantage. As they left the courthouse for the last time, Donald saw Jason waiting by a beat-up car in the parking lot. The once confident yoga instructor looked haggard. The strain of the past month was evident in his posture. Lucille paused, looking between Donald and Jason, indecision clear on her face. Donald merely nodded to her and walked away. He had no more words for either of them. Later that evening, as Donald was packing up the last of his things from the family home, Amber appeared in the doorway of his old office. "Dad," her voice was small, hesitant. "Can we talk?" Donald turned, regarding his daughter coolly. "What is it, Amber?" She stepped into the room, wringing her hands. I'm sorry for everything, for not believing you or defending Mom. I was wrong." For a moment, Donald felt a flicker of his old affection for his daughter, but the memory of her cruel words, "You're dead to me," still stung. I appreciate your apology, Amber, but it doesn't change what happened. Amber's eyes filled with tears. I know. I miss you, Dad. Can't we try to fix this? Donald sighed, feeling suddenly very tired. Some things, once broken, can't be easily fixed. I'll always be your father, Amber, but our relationship needs time. He turned back to his packing, effectively ending the conversation. He heard Amber's quiet sobs as she left the room, but he hardened his heart against them. Trust, once shattered, was not easily rebuilt. The next day, Donald moved into his new home, a sleek, modern apartment that bore no resemblance to the suburban house he'd shared with Lucille. As he stood on the balcony, looking out over the city, he felt a sense of possibility he hadn't experienced in years. The path of revenge had been long and bitter. He'd lost his marriage, strained his relationship with his daughter, and nearly lost his career. But he'd also rediscovered his strength, his resilience, and his self-respect. Donald Gill raised a glass to the setting sun, a solitary toast to new beginnings. The unforgiving path had led him here, to this moment of hard-won peace. Whatever came next, he would face it on his own terms. 6 years passed, each day putting more distance between Donald and the turmoil of his past. His career flourished, the promotion to VP of international projects leading to even greater opportunities. He traveled the world, leaving his mark on skylines from Dubai to Shanghai. But success, he found, was a poor substitute for family. The holidays were the hardest, his apartment feeling cavernous and empty, without the warmth of loved ones. It was on a crisp autumn evening, as Donald was reviewing plans for a new project in St. Louis, that the doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment he considered ignoring it. But something, intuition, perhaps, or just simple curiosity, propelled him to the door. He opened to see Amber standing there, looking both familiar and strange. At 25, she was no longer the defiant teenager he remembered, but a young woman with a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice catching slightly. "I need your help." Donald's hand tightened on the doorframe, his expression carefully neutral. "What kind of help, Amber?" She took a deep breath. "I want to go to grad school, but I can't afford it. I was hoping maybe you could help with the tuition." For a long moment, Donald said nothing. He simply looked at his daughter, memories of betrayal warring with the lingering embers of paternal love. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Wait here." He retreated into his apartment, leaving Amber shifting nervously in the hallway. When he returned, he was holding a sealed envelope. "I think," Donald said slowly, "that you should ask your real father for the money." Amber's brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about? You are my real father." Donald held out the envelope, opened it with trembling hands. Amber tore open the envelope and pulled out the contents. Her eyes widened as she scanned the document. A DNA test result. This can't be right," she whispered, her face pale. "I had suspicions for years," Donald said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your mother's affair with Jason started earlier than I initially thought. I got the test done after the divorce. But I never found the right moment to tell you. Or perhaps I just didn't want to hurt you further." Amber looked up from the paper, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, please, this doesn't change anything. You raised me. You're my father in every way that matters." Donald shook his head slowly. "No, Amber. This changes everything. It explains why you were so quick to defend your mother. Why you turned on me so easily." "Blood will out," he muttered. "Dad. No, please." Amber reached out, but Donald was already stepping back, his hand on the door. "You're nothing to me," he said. The words fell like hammer blows. "Go ask Jason for the money. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to know he has a daughter." With that, Donald closed the door, shutting out Amber's anguished cries. He leaned against it, feeling a complex mix of emotions: vindication, sorrow, and a grim sense of finality. His revenge was complete. He had lost both his unfaithful wife and the daughter who had betrayed him. But in that loss, he found a strange sort of freedom. The last ties to his old life were severed. Whatever came next, it would be entirely on his terms. Donald walked to the window, looking out at the city sprawled before him. The unforgiving path had led him here, to this moment of stark, solitary triumph. He had survived. He had prevailed. And in the end, that would have to be enough. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.